The budget proposal meets our goal of completing critical infrastructure projects, which will help address structural problems in the economy by lowering the cost of doing business for companies and the cost of living for average person.
National budget serves as a critical economic blueprint for any nation, reflecting its priorities, ambitions, and fiscal realities. In Nigeria, a resource-rich but economically diverse country, the budgeting process is a key element in governance, shaping how resources are allocated and addressing developmental challenges. After independence in 1960, Nigeria adopted a more developmental approach to budgeting, focusing on economic diversification, poverty alleviation, and infrastructure expansion. The adoption of national development plans from the 1960s to 1980s influenced budgetary policies, which were tied to 5-year plans aiming for rapid industrialization and self-sufficiency.
The overriding framework for budgeting is called Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. That act is what prescribes the process for budget preparation. First of all, the act says there shall be a fiscal strategy paper that outlines the fundamental assumptions by government on revenue and then cost projections and all other parameters that inform the decisions on those projections, which you call the fundamentals. For example, what is the projected output of crude oil? What is the project? And you do this over 3-year horizon. That's why it's called medium-term expenditure framework. We also have other frameworks like medium-term development plan, which goes for 5 years. Long-term development plan, which goes for 20-25 years. We have to 2050. We have to 2025. But the medium-term expenditure framework is a 3-year rolling plan. You plan for 3 years and then you budget for year 1. But you have figures for 3 years. So, but you have to have a fundamental assumptions on how much output of crude you expect to have in those periods, and then what the price estimates are, the price of crude, so that you can work out revenue government is expecting. And then you make projections on other revenues of government, like company income tax, personal income tax, all the other ones, growth in the assets. So all of those, capital gains tax, you project on all of those. And also the other internally generated revenue of government, and you project on those. Now, expenditure, you do the same. And then you now break down those into capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure. There are some money in the budget that is by law sequestered for certain establishments. It's called this consolidated revenue fund, is where all the government revenues come into. But then the law says 1% of this, of all that CRF, would go to NASEMA. 1% should go to Raw Material Research Council. 1% should go to primary health. So those ones, or even I think police fund or something like that, or judiciary as well. So although some of them already have a charge on that revenue, so you don't play with those. So the fiscal strategy paper comes out with these assumptions, which we debate all the time. It tells you what inflation projections are, how much inflate. And if you notice in this one coming on 2025, they projected 15.75% inflation, when the reality is that we are over 33%, 33.88%. But they projected half. Then they also projected $75 of revenue, dollar per barrel. That's the projection. But again, you know that we are all fighting that projection because it's too high. Normally in budgeting, you have to allow room between what the market price will be and what you are putting on your budget. So that headroom is where you have extras going to excess crude account. And from that excess crude account, some of them can go to reserves and then our foreign reserves. And some of them are shared out to governors during FAC meeting. So that's the big. When you close it up and put a projection that is higher than even the revenue that is going to come, it's going to force you into borrowing, a lot of borrowing, and then there will be a lot more fiscal pressure and also monetary policy pressure. So that's the major thing about it. So the fiscal strategy paper deals with all of that, and then you now come to medium-term expenditure framework, which is what you use to prepare your budget. Now, the budgeting process itself, the law requires that substantial consultations must take place because they want all shades of opinion to make input, make it more participatory budgeting. For example, around August, September, they will issue paper calling for budgets. And at the same time, the finance people will do the fiscal strategy paper and medium-term expenditure framework estimates and send it to approval. Approval must come from National Assembly, both houses of assembly. And when it comes, they put it straight to first, second reading, and then they have open public hearing, and then they will approve or amend.
The emergence of crude oil as a dominant revenue source in the 1970s introduced volatility to Nigeria's budgets. Oil revenues enabled ambitious infrastructure projects, but also entrenched dependency on single source, creating challenges in managing the economy during oil price fluctuations.
That you have it on budget and is approved is just one part of the story. The big story is, do you get the money released? And then do you release it on time? Because that's another thing. Because by the time you get 50% of the money, that year has elapsed. Although sometimes government allows the spending to continue to the March of the following year. Sometimes they also, if they see that they are not meeting up, they extend it to end of June, something like that. So, and then you now have 2 or 3 budgets running at the same time concurrently. The implementation and the budgetary releases determine how successful the project can be. It's not an exact science, it's a very difficult one, but especially when you're talking about capital projects.
Despite these structures, implementation often faces challenges, including delays in fund release, corruption, and capacity deficit within MDAs. For example, in 2018, the Nigerian national budget was not passed until June, halfway through the fiscal year, leaving only 6 months for implementation.
Two types of budgeting system, a zero-sum budgeting system and open envelope budgeting system. Both are almost the same or similar, but the difference is that an open budgeting system allows all manner of items to be inputted in a budget year, while a zero-sum will not allow all items to be inputted in a budget year. On the other hand, for Nigerians to understand this budgeting system, to understand the budget stands for 2 things. One, expenditure and revenue. That means what government is making in terms of money and what government is spending in terms of money. And all these two together is benchmarked according to the economic performance of Nigeria. One of them is exchange of the crude oil in terms of dollar sales, and the other one has to do with the exchange of the naira in terms of the dollar, as well as the economic implications or indicators within the Nigerian economy, talking about inflation and talking about a GDP growth. These are all inputted to calculate what the budget will be. But simply, budget is about expenditure of what government will spend in a particular year and in relation to how much it's going to make in that particular year similar. If you recall, the various government tried as much as possible to impose economic diversification through the agriculture. But as we speak right now, the current government are not even looking at that. Now, their own focus is on the mining sector of the Nigerian economy, which could be another better way to diversify the economy to get more revenue for the budget.
Ask me, I think Nigerian budget is too low for our size and our population. Nigeria should be doing 100 trillion naira budget. And why? For us to develop, go to Egypt, South Africa, and whatever, you see the level of their budget. For me, for us to move from this poverty level to a better economy, we must have a very big budget. And how do I mean? Look at the proposed budget. We have only 7% for capital expenditure, and capital expenditure is what benefits Nigerians. It's what will give us road, give us health care, give us education, and they are very small. In fact, debt servicing is higher than our capital expenditure. So for me, now imagine if we even borrow and borrow big, and when we borrow, we now said we need 5 trillion to solve the problem of housing. You now say, okay, this is 5 trillion, solve it once and for all. We need 7 trillion for our road, solve it once and for all. We need 8 trillion for education sector, solve it once and for all. So I think we should go back and make sure that our capital budget, and a good example is Enugu State. If you look at Enugu State now, the major of the budget is on capital expenditure. You see that state will galvanize, it will move, because there will be infrastructure for people to thrive upon. So Nigeria must shift from a paltry sum of 7 trillion for capital expenditure that will cover the whole Nigeria, the whole season, not like the recurrent that is going to be for maybe salary earners, which are maybe very, very small. So we should do that and review our budget.
To come and defend their budget. What we find out is the National Assembly always tinkers with the budget. They look at the fundamental assumption, they change them, and then they look at the deficit. Okay, that fiscal law says we should not have more than 3 to 4% deficit to GDP ratio. It used to be 3%, but they've increased it by Finance Act to 4%. So, and then if you notice, sometimes we go above it, but the projections are that it will return to 4% by the end of the year. The second thing is that there is also another thing that you watch in a budget. You watch the government debt to GDP. Normally, the rule of the top, the president has not set it. It's supposed to be set in the Fiscal Responsibility Law 2007. But the president was supposed to set it within 60 days of the implementation of this 2007, and he hasn't done it today. Normally, it should, best practice says 40% debt to GDP. World Bank said that the kind of economy you can actually go to 50%. But, and then we have other guidelines like ECOWAS macroeconomic convergence criteria, which also have, there are 10 of them, that places suggested limits of all these days. There's also a limit of debt service to government revenue. Now, that debt service to government revenue is the most problematic because we have very low government revenue to GDP, which is only about 10%. The best guide says 18% to 20%. We are so far down in that government revenue, and which means that many times the revenue that government gets, much of it is used to service debt, forcing us into more and more borrowing. But that is the guidelines that you all have that enables those constructing the budget. Then another thing is that some of the other things in the macroeconomic convergence criteria is that we are expected to invest not less than 20% of government money to be invested in public, which means they're looking for capital expenditure. So most governments try to keep capital expenditure around 30% and more. And then government, all the recurrent expenditure, take the other 70%. The reasoning is this: how can a country that generates 100% revenue from financing civil servants take 70%? And they are less than 3% of the population. And then the rest of the country is struggling with 30%. 30% is what creates jobs. That is where capital expenditure is, to create the jobs. So many of those are parameters that you watch when you are working out. There's also parameter like inflation. You must go for single-digit inflation. That is on the macroeconomic convergence criteria, but you can't do anything with it on the budget. Budget will not be able to control inflation. It's the job of central bank.
The budget process in Nigeria followed a standardized cycle involving distinct phases. However, challenges in Nigerian budget dynamics have been highlighted.
You are borrowing more than what your income can support. And this is the root of all our macroeconomic problems. And let me explain that. When you have a deficit, it means that government is just trying to borrow money that it doesn't have. And it's not borrowing money because it is reducing costs somewhere. If you are reducing costs and you are borrowing, then you will balance it up somehow. They are borrowing money. There are 3 ways government borrows money. Government can raise tax. That's one way it creates more money. 2, it can borrow it. 3, it can print more money. Those are the 3 ways. And when you print money, immediately you are printing inflation. Because I give you an example. If you have 10 cars, if the government has 10 cars and we have 100 million naira, 10 million naira will buy 1 car, isn't it? If the government goes away and prints another 100 million, it's now 20 million that is be buying 1 car, because you still have only 10 cars. But if the government prints 1 billion, it means 100 million is buying 1 car. So it goes from 10 million to 100 million. And that's exactly what happened to our economy when we printed 33 trillion naira. That is what happened. That's why the inflation went to an unmanageable level. And that inflation is tax that we are taxing people, because it reduces the purchasing power of the people in the country. The money you receive can no longer buy anything for you. The loan that the government takes, you are going to pay tax on it the following year. They will come back to you. It becomes part of the tax that you have to pay. So that is the danger that we have in having deficit financing. And then also the budget law has restrictions around deficit financing. It says it shouldn't be more than 3%. Now it's increased to 4% of our GDP. And so you always see it is only when it goes to the National Assembly they enforce it. They cut down the budget to make sure that it keeps within that law. That's what they do in the Assembly. The second thing, the second limit is on the printing of money, because the law allows government to go to central bank on what they call ways and means. Because when you are running the budget, all your income doesn't come on the first day. It comes over 12 months. But all your expenditure tend to be front-loaded, especially capital expenditures. So you would need some overdraft. So the law says don't borrow more than 10% of your total income in any 1 year and liquidate it within that 12 months. That's what the law says.
Meanwhile, to improve budget dynamics, country must adopt strategic reforms and recommendations, thus align the budget preparation timeline with constitutional provisions to ensure early presentation and approval by the National Assembly. The process of the budgeting starts from that body that actually aggregate or take a collection of the desires of the government appointees and agencies of government, which is the Ministry of Budget and Planning. So when they have a plan, a roadmap that this is where we are heading to, and the line of direction of the political leadership is towards there. So the priorities around that to actually tells you how efficient, how effective, how impactful the budget will be. So it starts from that Ministry of Budget and National Planning, both on the center or the federal and the subnational government. So those institutions and bodies like the Budget Office should have a clear vision of the policy of government, a clear vision of the vision or the desires of the political leadership, which is well articulated and prioritized in the sense that yes, opportunity cost will be there because you have limited resources, and apply the available resources to those budget line items that you have listed that could impact in the life and improve the overall economy of Nigeria. So we need some level of decency, some level of priorities placed in those process of computing the budget from that Ministry of Budget and National Planning. That is where it starts. Then it ends up in the House of Assembly, State House of Assembly, or the National Assembly, where the legislators will make their input. So we needed a legislator who also understands that those budget line items need to impact in the lives of Nigerians. Where you have misplaced priorities, they need to correct it. If
you are building a road that does not have impact in the economy, they need to redirect such building of road to something that is better to the life of Nigeria. You are building a borehole where people are not living. You don't need to waste that resources, push it to where these resources are needed. So there should be some level of coordination from the executive and the legislature. That's where you can see those process of budgeting or process of implementation of the budget well impactful in the life of Nigerians. That is what is expected from the executive and from the legislature. These are the two line items or the two main executors or implementers of the budget. From that process of articulating the wishes of government, articulating the needs of the people, and making sure that they are meaningful, making sure also that they are impactful, making sure also that our resources are valuable, making sure that priorities are placed so that we can have a better economy that can improve the lives of Nigerians.
It is recommended that the country adopt a strict fiscal calendar where the budget is presented by September and approved before December to allow implementation from January.
Because as we speak right now, 2025 budget is about to be placed in National Assembly. But how many of our citizens are aware of it? Even when they know about it, when it is being passed, all they regard is to be that it is money for the elite in our society. But that should change through the way of sensitization, enlightenment, and projects like what we are doing through the media on how to engage citizens and how to also enlighten citizens about this particular budgeting system in Nigeria. But the onus of the job still fall on the government. If government doesn't make announcement on when budget will be passed or when budget will be submitted to the National Assembly, and the public hearing about this budget is very key. Although on the part of citizens, it may be limited because citizens that can go and participate in budgeting public hearing at National Assembly or at the state level. But it's good that we inform them, we tell them, we publicize it, and make a noise around it, particularly with advocacy on TV, radio, and the rest. But the key issue is that if the citizens themselves are not interested, because it has been, established that most citizens have this lackadaisical attitude towards government policy, and that's why they normally see government as mistrust venture.
During the construction of the budget, they are invited. We do virtual all over the country. The various accountants, because Accountant General's office has representatives in all the 500 MDAs, then state governments, accountants, and all these auditors. They all take part about the national this, that, and the other. Then the civil societies also participate in the public hearing. You will see them in the public hearing, asking questions and threatening to go to court. So they participate. And then at all the stages of the budget, when the budget comes, they also have public hearing. When the medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy comes, they will also have public hearing. So they have ample opportunity to attend. And then if there's a report on monitoring or oversight, they quickly pick it up and start pressing for response. So they do participate. The law provides adequate things for them to participate.
The nation's budgeting process is a vital tool for economic governance and development. While the country has made strides in refining its procedures and embracing fiscal responsibility, addressing these issues requires commitment to transparency, accountability, and strategic planning. With sound policies and effective implementation, the country can harness its budgetary process to drive inclusive growth and national progress. Adamma Oka.